Today we're going to be looking at a 2017 mystery film called Shimmer Lake. The movie revolves around a cop trying to investigate a bank robbery that involves his brother and a few other local people he knows from the neighborhood. Spoilers ahead, you have been warned, and before we get into the video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. The opening scene of the film is a tracking shot of the lake, which gives us an idea about the nature of the town. Small and simple, yet native. The story is told in reverse. It starts on Friday morning, which in reality is the conclusive day of the actual story, when we see that Andy, the cop's brother, is passed out on the floor, covered in bloodstains in the basement of his own house. Andy wakes up and tries to clean himself. While he's changing his clothes, he hears Martha's voice, Andy's wife, reacting to someone entering the house. She thinks it's Andy finally returning home, but instead it's Zeke, the cop. Andy looks worried. Zeke says hi to Sally, Andy's daughter, just before Andy's wife sends her to the basement to get a box of cereal. Andy gets scared and rushes inside to hide inside the storage room of the basement. Sally comes downstairs and slowly opens the door of the storage when Andy shushes her and asks her not to tell anybody that he's hiding there in the basement. Sally brings the box of cereal upstairs when Zeke asks her if she was talking to somebody downstairs. Sally denies it, and Andy's wife unknowingly clears the suspicion by saying that it must have been Sally's imaginary friend, Melissa. Suddenly, the landline rings, and Andy's wife picks it up in a hurry, only to find out that it's Reed who's trying to reach Zeke. Reed is Zeke's partner who updates him with some information on the case. Right at that moment, we see that Sally is walking down to the basement again with her bowl of cereal. Zeke finds it highly suspicious and follows her to the basement. Zeke stops Sally from entering the storage room and asks her to go back upstairs. Zeke opens the door of the storage room and finds nothing. He suddenly hears the sound of tires screeching and runs out, only to find out that Andy has escaped by stealing the neighbor's car. After escaping, Andy calls Steph, who's still not properly introduced to us, and asks her to meet him at Shimmer Lake. Zeke reaches Reed's house to pick him up along with a neighbor. Reed is frustrated with the fact that he doesn't get to sit in the front of the police car even though he's Zeke's partner. On their way in the car, it is revealed that Zeke was shot in the shoulder on the night of the robbery. Moving on, we see Steph sitting by a mirror, checking up on the wound on her face. The mirror has a small photo of Edward Jr. on it. Steph is then seen packing clothes into her travel bag, which tells us that she's about to flee somewhere because her actions look suspicious. Zeke and Reed meet up at Judge Brad Dawkins' house with feds Kyle Walker and Kurt Biltmore from the Bureau, who are going to be assisting Zeke in the investigation. Zeke asks them if they saw anything at Burton's place last night when they were patrolling, to which Kyle casually says that he saw a naked boy running across the street. They enter the judge's house as they discover that the main door is open. They go inside and find out that Judge Dawkins is dead already. We see Steph get emotional as she's seen standing by the grave of Edward Burton Jr. Andy reaches Shimmer Lake with the bag of money and waits for Steph. The FBI agents and Zeke discuss the case, and he tries to explain every possible angle to them. Zeke informs Reed that he is about to drive to Burton's place and check if there are any updates. Steph is sitting by the window looking outside. She gets up and closes the curtain as soon as she sees a car approaching her house. Steph reaches Shimmer Lake and meets Andy. Andy tosses the bag in the trunk, and as he goes up front to get inside the car, we see a hand of a man tattooed state champs back to back fire 3 bullets into Andy in cold blood. As we move ahead, it's Thursday, when Judge Dawkins tries to reach Ed on call, but he's unable to be reached. Andy meets Steph at her house, where she tells her that Dawkins has the money. Steph hands him a gun and asks him to kill Judge Hawkins so that they can get the money. Zeke visits Martha and Sally to check on them. Zeke insists on dropping Sally off at school. Zeke and Sally have a chat in the car where he talks about cleaning up the mess in the town. They reach Reed's place, where again we see that Reed doesn't get to sit up front in the car. Steph is looking for something in the storage closet when a box of Ed Jr.'s shoes falls on the floor, which takes her back to the incident in the past where a blast happens on the Shimmer Lake. Steph then injures herself intentionally with the iron she just took out of the closet. Judge Dawkins sits uneasily at his house when he learns through the news that 2 suspects have been confirmed by the police as Ed Burton and Andrew Sykes. We learn that Dawkins was in on the robbery at his bank because he was blackmailed off some videotape. Elsewhere, Zeke and the other cops discover that Chris, who's suspected to be the third guy in the robbery, is killed in some motel room. While the feds discuss why Chris was a bit slow, we learn that Chris and Ed caused the meth lab blast, which damaged Chris's brain, put Edward in jail, and killed Steph's kid. Regarding Chris, Zeke mentions that a lot of people even dated the same girl in the past, hinting at Steph. Zeke also mentions that Andy was the prosecutor on Ed's case and that he took a bribe to drop the manslaughter charges off Ed's name. When Zeke and the cops arrive at Steph's house, she tells him that Ed assaulted her because she denied fleeing away with him to Mexico. Andy calls Zeke and tries to trick him by lying that he is in Mexico. Zeke asks him the truth about the case of Edward Burton from the past. Andy admits that he took the bribe. Zeke tells Andy to surrender or he'll face severe consequences. Dawkins calls his lover home to have a little fun. Zeke visits Martha and Sally at their house to have dinner. Judge Dawkins is revealed as gay when his lover turns out to be a young teenage boy. Andy sneaks into Dawkins' house and threatens him to hand over the money or he'll have to kill him. Andy is about to finally leave with a bag of money, but Dawkins' lover boy makes the situation worse by letting his presence be known accidentally. The heat of the situation sees Andy accidentally fire a bullet into the back of the judge's head. Andy allows the boy to leave under one condition, that he keeps his mouth shut. The FBI agents Walker and Biltmore are camping outside Steph's house looking for Ed. Agent Walker accidentally spots the naked kid about whom we were told earlier. Andy sneaks into the basement of his own house and passes out on the floor as he's too exhausted. We're now into Wednesday, which is the day after the heist. Andy and Chris are in Chris's car figuring out the next moves. Andy asks Chris to stash his car in one of the barns around and meet him at Rudy's scrapyard come night. Reed again has an upset face when he sees Steph sitting in the front seat of Zeke's car as they come to pick him up. They drive up to Steph's place and ask her for information on her husband. Meanwhile, FBI agents Walker and Biltmore meet Zeke outside of Steph's home for the first time. Zeke talks to them and convinces them to allow him to lead the investigation as it's a local matter. Zeke also mentions that they all were together in their high school football team. Later, Zeke and the other cops head over to Chris's house to find out more on the matter, but they find out nothing. Chris, on the other hand, gets a call from Steph. She calls him to meet up at a motel. After Chris enters the room, Steph tries to trick him into going crazy by stripping in front of him and going for a shower. Out of the blue, right at that moment, Judge Dawkins enters the room and accidentally kills Chris using Chris's machine gun because Steph provoked Chris to attack Dawkins. Steph asks Dawkins to hold the money for a little while until things cool off. Dawkins goes home to his wife and asks her to go stay at their cabin for the weekend with the kids. He lies to her by saying that he needs the house to play poker with his friends. Dawkins feels guilty looking back at all the sins he did as he gets emotional. He cries out to his wife saying how he hasn't been a good husband to her. We're on to Tuesday now. It's the day of the robbery. We finally see Ed Burton at his house with his wife, where his tattoo is revealed, state champs back to back. They quarrel and fight over the past. Ed storms out of there because Steph kept asking him to take responsibility for the death of her child. Away from there at the Sykes' residence, Andy grows an edgy behavior towards Martha and Sally as he's getting more and more anxious about the heist that night. One of the enjoyable comic lights of this movie is shone once again upon us as Zeke has the company of Ed Burton alongside him in the car this time, and that's when Reed yet again has to hop in the back. Advancing further, we see Ed is painting chairs in a workshop. He gets a call from Judge Hawkins, who owns the bank. He reluctantly gives him the codes to the locker of his bank as part of their blackmail. Later, Andy and Chris meet up with Steph and Ed at their place to plan the robbery. Despite Steph's attempts to convince them to call it off, Ed tells her that this is the only way to start a new life. Zeke arrives at the bank for his shift as Dawkins is about to head home. Before leaving though, he hints to Zeke that he should without a doubt shoot the person first, rather than arresting, if any situation like that may arrive in the future if someone tries to rob his bank. Ed, Andy, and Chris arrive at the bank. Zeke is reading a book when Ed and Andy break into the bank. Zeke pretty easily gives himself up to be a hostage, and when Ed and Andy have the situation under control, Andy goes outside to watch the door along with Chris, who's waiting in the car as their getaway driver. Zeke not only recognizes everyone, but also helps out Ed with the codes of the locker. On the outside, a worried Chris asks Andy if things can go back to normal once this is all over, to which Andy lays out the truth to him. Inside the bank, things get pretty heated between Zeke and Ed, when Zeke provokes Ed by calling him responsible for Ed Jr.'s death. Zeke shoots him with a gun that he hid inside his paper bag that he had his dinner. As Zeke uncuffs himself, Steph walks in out of nowhere and tells Ed the truth about Edward Jr. Steph and Zeke are revealed to be the real parents of Ed Jr. The whole idea behind involving Ed, Andy, Chris, and Dawkins in the robbery was because Zeke and Steph wanted justice against all those responsible for their kid's death. Zeke then puts a bullet in Ed's head, and then he and Steph perfectly design the crime scene as they wanted to. Steph fires a bullet into Zeke's numbered arm as part of their plan, while it is revealed that even Zeke has the same tattoo as Ed, and that Zeke was the one who killed Andy. Zeke walks out of the bank to scare away Andy and Chris as they race away in their car. Zeke then calls off the bank alarm while Steph buries Ed's body and his car inside a hole they dug out at Shimmer Lake. Zeke completes the plan as he lays down alongside Ed's blood inside the bank. Meanwhile, Chris and Andy get pulled over on the road by cops for speeding, but they're released without any questions asked when the cops get called on the radio for the same bank heist, for which Andy and Chris are actually responsible. Reed is the first respondent to the scene, and he calls the cops and the medics for help. Zeke gives out his statement and executes the last step of his master plan. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like the video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to our channel to see more of these movie summaries.